Finally, the day has arrived when I don't have to see your face anymore. People who just eat without working should leave. You should be grateful for being allowed to freeload until now. Got it? I won't be coming back. Thanks for everything so far. I quickly packed my stuff and left my in-laws' place where I had been living for many years. As I left, my mother-in-law seemed very pleased. But only I know a certain sad truth. I'm Sarah, 32 years old, and I work from home. I've been married to Alan for 5 years. Our life was peaceful until the 4th year of marriage. Suddenly, my usually healthy father-in-law fell ill and needed care. That's when we started living with my in-laws. I wasn't thrilled about moving in so soon, but my husband is their only child, and there's no one else for them to rely on. We ended up taking care of my father-in-law. I considered quitting my job for his care, but luckily, based on my past performance, my company allowed me to keep working from home. The issues with my in-laws started right away. Yep, I dealt with the classic mother-in-law and daughter-in-law clash. Sarah, hurry up and handle the cooking and cleaning. How long are you going to be lazy and avoid your housework? Mother-in-law, I'm working right now. What are you talking about? You're always just clicking away on the computer. The truth is, you're just browsing the internet, not really working right. Thinking that using the computer means goofing off on the internet is so outdated. I have permission to work from home from my company. Amidst the household chores and taking care of my father-in-law, I've used my skills to bring my salary back to what it was before. After about 3 months of hard work, when I finally managed to match my previous salary, I felt a real sense of joy. The reason I worked so hard is that Alan's salary isn't enough to cover our expenses. I thought life would become easier, and I even considered saving money. However, things kept getting tougher, and it felt like my wallet was always losing its contents. Curious, I investigated where the money was going and discovered that Alan was spending a lot. I also found out that my mother-in-law was wasteful with money. Alan, being a people pleaser, often treated colleagues to lunch, and lately he was using our credit cards for drinking parties. No matter how much I earn, if Alan spends more, our finances will dwindle. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law juggled multiple expensive hobbies with friends, paying for lessons and socializing. I can't tolerate the fact that my husband and mother-in-law continue their wasteful spending while leaving all the housework and care for my father-in-law to me. I've ended up covering all our living expenses with my income, making saving money a distant dream. Anxious about this, I decided to talk to my husband and mother-in-law. Alan and mother-in-law, it looks like our spending has been quite high lately. If this continues, we'll run out of money. Can you both please try to cut back on your expenses? Alan and my mother-in-law didn't take my words well. I don't want to feel embarrassed. I can't appear stingy in front of my colleagues and subordinates. You get that right. They won't think poorly of you just because there are times when you don't foot the bill. You don't have to treat them every single time. You might not get it, but maintaining good relationships with your coworkers is crucial for smooth work. Treating your juniors to lunch is one thing, but what about those trips to the girls' bars? That has nothing to do with work, does it? It just seems like you're out for fun. How can you come home drunk and start talking about it, even when no one asks you? It implies that you find more enjoyment there than spending time with your family. I'm relieved that Mom understands and agrees. If I skip my classes, I'd just be stuck at home. I take classes with my friends to make the most of the limited time I have left in this world. But what a terrible daughter-in-law I must be. All she sees is the housework, thinking I don't contribute anything, so I have no right to complain. Seriously though, what's she thinking? A homemaker looking down on us as if from a high horse. Let me make it clear, I am working, earning a steady income, and contributing to this household. I'm also handling housework and taking care of my father-in-law. Don't lie. Working from home, you can't be earning that much. Mother is the one doing the living. Don't act so high and mighty for a part-timer. I was so shocked by what I heard that I couldn't even respond. They didn't seem to grasp that I was juggling housework, caregiving, and maintaining a steady income. Moreover, it appeared that my mother-in-law had told Alan that she was the one taking care of my father-in-law, making it seem like I was just a homemaker doing nothing. There were moments when I thought about leaving that house. I seriously contemplated it, but the reason I stayed was because of my father-in-law. Since I got married, he always treated me with kindness, unlike Alan and my mother-in-law. He would often say things like, "Sarah, I'm grateful to have a wonderful daughter-in-law like you. I apologize for everything." Father-in-law, taking care of you isn't a burden. Why would you say that? Sure, I feel bad imposing on you like this, but more than that, I'm concerned about my wife and son. They leave everything to you, doing as they please, right? Yes, you're right. I recognize that it's thanks to your hard work that our household finances are staying afloat. Alan's income alone wouldn't be enough to sustain this household. Father-in-law, you knew all along. It seemed he had understood our family situation for quite some time, and every time he received care, he expressed gratitude with heartwarming words. I genuinely cherished such a father-in-law and even found joy in looking after him. What would happen to this house if I left? I worried about who would care for my beloved father-in-law, so I chose to be the one providing proper care until he passed away a year later. My father-in-law passed away. During the funeral for my beloved father-in-law, tears flowed uncontrollably. "Sarah, why are you crying so much? What's wrong?" "Father-in-law has passed away. Isn't it normal to mourn like this?" "I've been his caregiver all this time." My response seemed to anger my mother-in-law. "You're making it seem like I never took care of him." The truth is, my mother-in-law hardly took care of my father-in-law. She was always busy with her hobbies, frequently going out. Since I was at home, she didn't have to handle any caregiving or housework. She even put on a tearful act in front of relatives, portraying herself as the oppressed and pitiful mother-in-law. To outsiders, it might have seemed like I was the unkind daughter-in-law. They defended her, saying, "Don't be so hard on your mother-in-law," and blamed me, despite the fact that I was simply mourning my father-in-law's death. People who knew nothing criticized me, making me furious. I decided to distance myself from the relatives. That's when Ellen took notice and approached me with complaints. "You embarrassed Mom in front of everyone." "What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. I was only crying about father-in-law's death. Yet, your mom came over and told me it was strange for me to cry. Didn't you make it sound like she hadn't taken care of Dad at all?" "I never said such a thing. I just talked about mourning the loss of my father-in-law, whom I had always cared for." "Perhaps it sounded like criticism to you because, in reality, your mom did nothing." "Are you insulting Mom?" "I'm not insulting anyone. I'm just stating the facts. And by the way, if it bothers you so much, you could have done more to care for father-in-law too. If you're so upset about it, you should have taken care of him yourself." "Why are you criticizing me? How can it be none of my business? It's only natural that you, his blood relative, would take care of him. I'm working for this family, managing the house. Taking care of relatives is part of wife duties." "That's absurd. Don't be so ridiculous. I'm working too, you know." Our argument escalated, and the relatives had to intervene. Although they stopped our argument, I didn't speak to my husband at all after that. Once all the funeral proceedings were finished, a lawyer came to explain the inheritance. "I'd like to discuss the contents of the will regarding your late father's estate first. To the wife and the daughter-in-law Sarah, he's left half of his cash to each of you, and to his son Ellen, he's left ownership of the family land and home." "What if Alan gets the land and the house? Doesn't that mean all the other assets go to the wife? Why is Sarah receiving an inheritance? I'm his wife. Your husband was deeply grateful to Sarah for the dedicated care she gave him. He wanted to give her part of the inheritance as a sign of his gratitude. This is his decision. He made his decision, and it can't be changed. I can't believe it." "Oh, I get it. You were caring for him just to get the inheritance, weren't you?" "How could you think that? That has to be it. Otherwise, there's no way you could have been so devoted to him despite not being related by blood." "I had a good relationship with my father-in-law ever since I got married. I took care of him to express my gratitude. Are you suggesting that you tried to make someone unrelated by blood take care of your own husband? Isn't that like psychological abuse? Don't be ridiculous. Fine, I won't bring it up anymore. Appearing frustrated that she couldn't say anything else inappropriate in front of the lawyer, my mother-in-law continued. So that was Dad's decision. It's grand gratitude for Sarah's caregiving, right? If that's the case, then we have no choice but to follow. May I continue? All right. Well, your father stated that it's no longer necessary to rely on Sarah. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law's face, which had been dissatisfied just moments ago, suddenly broke into a smile. Yes, that's great. I understand. Huh? What do you mean? My mother-in-law seemed pleased, but my husband was confused. He didn't seem to understand what she was saying. So, in the end, Sarah's inheritance is nothing more than severance pay. It's not gratitude at all. Now that Dad's caregiving is over, we don't need Sarah in this house anymore. My mother-in-law had misconstrued my father-in-law's will just as he had intended. The truth is, my father-in-law had discussed this with me before. He wanted me to be free from this house after he passed away. He used the will to cleverly deceive my husband and mother-in-law, making it appear natural for me to leave. And just as my father-in-law had planned, my mother-in-law, completely misunderstanding his true intentions, saw the will as an opportunity to kick me out. Feigning shock at the will to conceal my actual desire to leave, I said, "Father-in-law, why would you treat me like this? To Dad, you were just someone to take care of him. Ellen, you can't understand Sarah anymore, right? Why don't you just divorce her, Ellen? You'll still stay married to me, right?" With tears in my eyes, I looked at Alan. After contemplating for a while, he said, "You know what? Let's get a divorce. I've inherited the family home and land, and Mom got some money too. There's no longer any need to worry about caregiving. So there's no problem if Sarah goes." Huh? What do you mean by that? Just what I said. I feel bad for asking, but could you leave our house and agree to the divorce? Understood. I suppose there's no place for me here anymore. Saying this with a hint of restraint, I retrieved a document from the drawer and handed it to my husband. After our recent disagreement, I went and obtained this. No mistake, the document was a notice of filing for divorce. My husband promptly signed it. Finally, I don't have to deal with you anymore. A non-working freeloader should just get out. Ellen, you should be grateful for us having put up with you. A total freeloader? Is that so? Okay, I understand. I'll leave. Thank you for everything up to now. By the way, since the lawyer is here, I want to check one thing. It's okay that I don't get any more than what I've already received from father-in-law's estate, right? Of course. You seem to have gotten a bit smarter, Sarah. You've been living off me until now, so don't even think about squeezing any more money out of me. Well, I suppose you're right. All right, it's settled then. Please make yourself disappear quickly. I promptly packed my things and left my in-laws' house. Watching me leave, my mother-in-law looked as pleased as could be. They had no idea what would happen to this house in the future. After leaving my in-laws' house, I immediately submitted the divorce notice to City Hall. And when I arrived at the apartment I had rented in advance, I couldn't help but shout out loud in the spacious room. Finally, I can be by myself. This is great. Overwhelmed with joy to be freed from such a challenging marriage, I was truly grateful to my father-in-law for devising the plan to help me escape my in-laws' home. Subsequently, I relished a comfortable life on my own. Having adapted to remote work during my time at my in-laws, I became adept at managing my time, and work proceeded seamlessly. Thanks to that, my income increased, and I enjoyed a content life without any disturbances. Until one day, my ex-husband Alan reached out to me. It's been a while. Why are you calling me? We're in a pinch, Sarah. Please help us. What kind of joke is this? Weren't you the ones who told me to disappear? My salary hasn't changed, but for some reason, we're running out of money. We can't live like this. Oh dear, that's a problem, isn't it? I decided to deliver the final blow. That's because you no longer have my income to support you. Huh? What do you mean? You still don't get it. Didn't you notice while living so lavishly that your salary alone was not enough? I had thought that we could live on my salary alone. But you're telling me that's not the case. Of course, you squandered your entire salary on yourself. We only got by because I was the one paying for our living expenses. Maybe it's about time you and your mother learned some financial responsibility as adults. So, how much were you making then? Let's see. At that time, I was making about $4,800 a month. Maybe that's more than me. That's right. You didn't know, did you? By the way, now I'm earning even more than that with no one to get in my way. Even through the phone, I could sense my husband's frustration clearly. Hey, Sarah, can't we start over? It was a mistake to let you go. I want to make things right again. Huh, it's obvious you're after my income. Are you stupid? That's not true. I still love you, Sarah. Don't be ridiculous. I never want to see your face again. By the way, what happened to the inheritance your mother received? With that amount, she should be living comfortably, right? That's the thing. It's about to run out. That's impossible. It was nearly $100,000, right? That's not an amount you can use up in just a few months. Mom and I spent it on a shopping spree, overseas trips, and half of it disappeared in the casino. A foolish mother breeds a foolish son. I have nothing more to say to you. Besides, I'm a stranger now, so I can't do anything for you, and I don't want to. Don't be so heartless. Help me. This has nothing to do with me. There's nothing more to talk about, so I'm hanging up. Don't call me again. Saying this, I ended the call on my end and promptly canceled the contract for the mobile phone I was using. What became of my ex-husband and mother-in-law afterward is none of my business, and I do not know. However, about a year after that call, I passed by my mother-in-law's house, and it had become an empty lot. They probably had to let go of the house due to financial reasons. Well, it's really none of my business. Anyway, as for me, with my newfound spare time, I started attending a wine class that had piqued my interest for some time. There, I met a man 2 years my senior who took me seriously, and after dating for a year and a half, we got married. He is the ace of a well-known company that many people are aware of, and despite his high salary, he is humble with a warm and wonderful character. He respects my career, and we enjoy a fulfilling married life filled with mutual respect. These days, I feel that maybe all this retribution was a gift from my father-in-law. My name is Susan, and currently I find myself balancing a demanding career while raising my only son, Ethan. Despite getting married, my passion for work has not waned. As the president of a small company, I had no concerns about a salary cut upon returning from maternity leave, thanks to a reliable team handling my business during the hectic times of childcare. However, there is another issue weighing heavily on my mind, something more personal and challenging. It revolves around my mother-in-law, Dorothy, my husband, James, our son, Ethan, and I live in a house. Ever since my father-in-law passed away, Dorothy moved in with us. Initially, we thought it would be temporary, but Dorothy showed no signs of leaving. One day, I mustered the courage to ask Dorothy, "How long do you plan to stay with us?" In a dramatized manner, she raised her voice and began to cry, accusing me of trying to kick her out. I was taken aback by her reaction, feeling a mix of surprise and confusion. James, who overheard our conversation, rushed to Dorothy's side and comforted her. After Dorothy stopped crying, James asked her to go to her room, leaving me alone. He immediately glared at me and accused me of being cold to his mother. I clarified that I didn't intend to tell her to leave, but James interpreted my inquiry differently, concluding that I was in the wrong. Reluctantly, I backed down, wrestling with my thoughts about Dorothy staying for an extended period. I was curious about when she would leave but felt unable to ask directly due to the fear of emotional repercussions. Dorothy behaved as though the house were her own, showing little regard for my comfort. One unexpected day, she made a startling announcement. She decided to relinquish her ancestral home and transfer all her belongings to my house. A moving truck driven by Steve, a friendly but straightforward mover, pulled up in front of their house. I was speechless with astonishment, my mouth agape in disbelief. On that day, supposed to be special for Ethan with a planned family outing to the amusement park, James disrupted the plans by declaring it a day for unpacking. Ethan, anticipating the amusement park visit, glanced between me and James with a near-tearful expression, seeking reassurance about their plans. I found myself comforting my son in the midst of the unexpected changes. I reassured Ethan, "Don't worry, Ethan, we'll definitely go to the amusement park." However, James frowned, questioning, "Are we really going to play instead of unpacking?" I firmly responded that a family trip to the amusement park had been a long-standing plan, emphasizing that breaking a promise to our child for unpacking was unthinkable. I stood my ground, believing in the righteousness of my stance. The planned visit to the amusement park had been set over a month in advance. We had prepared various things and were looking forward to spending this day as a family. Spending time together was crucial for us. Yet, it was a complete surprise to hear that my mother-in-law was suddenly moving into our house. Moreover, being told that today was the day for unpacking left us bewildered. I prioritized our family plans above all. It's my policy to cherish the bond with my family. However, my mother-in-law reacted emotionally to my decision, crying excessively and claiming, "Susan doesn't want to live with me. That's why she's prioritized her own child over me." Steve, the mover, realizing the conversation wasn't progressing, asked, "Well, unpacking can be done anytime. Isn't keeping a promise with your family more important? Also, did you actually inform your daughter-in-law about the move?" Perhaps embarrassed by Steve's rational words, my mother-in-law's face turned red. My husband, James, just glared at me, uncertain of how to react. It seemed he preferred to prioritize packing for his mother over going to the amusement park with our son. Nevertheless, I took Ethan's hand and headed to the park as promised, creating a clear rift between my husband and me. One day, my mother-in-law casually broached the subject. "Hey, Susan, could you possibly stay home this upcoming weekend?" Seemingly oblivious to any plans I might have already made, a surge of irritation welled up inside me. Yet I strived to maintain composure in my response. "Why do you ask?" I inquired, striving to mask my annoyance with a tone of neutrality. She expressed her desire to spend quality time with Ethan, claiming that I was always around him, making it unfair for her. It was apparent she had eavesdropped on my earlier conversation about a mall outing plan with Ethan for the next weekend. She began to assert that I should avoid joining them at the mall, suggesting a scenario where James, Ethan, and herself would go, leaving me to oversee the house alone. I responded, "If you're keen on visiting the mall, why don't we all go together?" I suggested, hoping to strike a balance and not let Ethan out of my sight, especially not with Dorothy, whose trustworthiness had been in question since the day I witnessed her faint tears. Dorothy's expression morphed into a mix of reluctance and disappointment. She was jarred by my proposition. Voicing her displeasure was not an option, and with evident reluctance, she nodded in agreement, conceding to the new plan. At the shopping mall, I was selecting clothes for my son, Ethan, just as I had planned. Recognizing that children grow up fast, I picked out slightly larger sizes. Suddenly, my mother-in-law, Dorothy, came over and said, "Don't you know his size?" This size would fit Ethan perfectly. She had chosen a size that fit Ethan just right for the moment. I tried to explain that kids grow quickly, and it's better to have a bit of room in their clothes. However, Dorothy quickly retorted, "When he grows, just buy new ones. Don't be so stingy." I was internally taken aback by her attitude. Continuously buying perfectly fitting clothes would be a waste of money, and our family budget couldn't afford such frequent purchases. I resisted. But then my husband, James, intervened, saying, "I'm paying the bills. If you're stingy, it reflects poorly on me." Ultimately, James paid for the clothes Dorothy had picked out. Afterward, Ethan wore those clothes for a while, but in just a few months, he started complaining that they were too tight and stopped wearing them. Dorothy saw this, and her face showed a mix of emotions, a complicated blend of realization and disappointment. deciding to sort out the unnecessary clothes overflowing in our home, many of which were no longer in use. I chose to give them to a mother friend of mine, whom I got close to at the daycare center attached to our company. She was delighted to receive them, and seeing her joy warmed my heart. However, my use of this daycare center seemed to be something my mother-in-law couldn't come to terms with. She didn't try to hide her critical attitude towards me, challenging me with a stern tone. Why would you leave Ethan with someone else when I'm right here at home and working while having a child? That's detrimental to his upbringing. Her words pierced deeply into my heart, but I felt the need to firmly state my position. Actually, I need to work too, or our finances wouldn't make ends meet, I replied. Yet, with a firm resolve, my mother-in-law further criticized me, saying, "Just how much do you think your earnings amount to? I'm sure James brings home much more than you, so you wouldn't need to work for us to live comfortably. You must be incompetent at your job," she accused. Her words deeply scarred me, and at that moment, I wondered if James had ever mentioned to her that I was the president of our company. Frustrated with this realization, I felt the need to find a new way to navigate this complex relationship with my mother-in-law. "I actually earn more than James, mother-in-law," I said, my voice laced with a mix of confidence and a hint of sarcasm. Little did I know this remark was about to ignite a fiery response from Dorothy, my mother-in-law. "How dare you speak like that, daughter-in-law?" Dorothy raised her voice, a blend of shock and anger seeping through her words. "To openly undermine your husband is unforgivable. Not only does she barely manage to care for our child, but she also has James assist with the household chores. And now she boasts about earning more than her husband. Can't she even show the slightest respect for him? James wouldn't struggle a bit without you around." Dorothy's voice grew louder, filling the room with her indignation. Hearing the commotion, James entered the room, a look of concern etched on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, sensing his son's presence as a form of support. Dorothy continued with even more vigor. "Tell me, James, you don't meet Susan, do you? If it were just you, me, and Ethan, we could live happily. This woman's presence only makes our lives more constrained, doesn't it?" James, slightly taken aback, responded hesitantly. "Ah, well." His lackluster replies seemed to fuel Dorothy's resolve. "Then let's go for a divorce," she exclaimed, retrieving a divorce form from the shelf. It appeared that Dorothy had been harboring the intention of suggesting a divorce to me and James all along. Internally grappling with the turmoil, I came to the realization that I no longer needed a husband who prioritized his mother over his own family. However, I was determined not to give up custody. James shouted angrily, "Everything about you is unbearable. You are no longer needed in our family of three," his voice trembling with anger, symbolizing the collapse of our years-long marriage. Longing for freedom from this house, or rather this relationship, I responded calmly, "I understand, James." With a steady hand, I signed the divorce papers, marking the end of our relationship. Our family consisted of me, my husband James, and our grown son Ethan. However, ever since my mother-in-law Dorothy moved in, the tension in our home had been escalating. Disregarding our plans, Dorothy forced me to help her unpack her belongings, ruining Ethan and my eagerly awaited trip to the amusement park. When I began preparing for the move, she abruptly took James on a hot spring vacation. Ethan had been invited, but having witnessed her mistreatment towards me, he declined, preferring to stay with me. He was still upset about how Dorothy nearly canceled our amusement park plans. Respecting Ethan's decision, James and Dorothy left for their trip, leaving us behind. During their absence, I packed only mine and Ethan's belongings and had them transported by the mover, Steve. In my decisive letter, I informed James that he would be responsible for the $4,000 monthly rent for this house henceforth. I also mentioned hiring a lawyer for the custody battle and property division. Leaving the letter on the table, Ethan and I stepped into our new life. Upon their return from the week-long hot spring vacation, James and Dorothy contacted me immediately over the phone. James exclaimed, "Susan, did you really take Ethan with you? Mom is upset." Shouldn't I have custody? His voice was a mix of anger and surprise. Realizing he hadn't read the letter I left, I asked James gently, "Could you please read the letter I left on the living room table?" The living room, a space she had designed with great care, radiated warmth. He harbored serious concerns about the content of the letter. If it's that letter, Mom said she'd check it first. And she's already read it? James responded, a bit bewildered, often taking his mother, Dorothy's word for everything. I explained the contents of the letter. It says that you will be responsible for the $4,000 monthly rent of this house going forward. It also states that I won't give up custody of Ethan. And regarding the division of property, I'll contact you after hiring a lawyer. $4,000, James exclaimed in shock, standing frozen. He was aware of the rental status of their home, but had not grasped the actual amount. His cavalier attitude towards financial management had always been a source of stress for me. This house was a rental costing about $4,000 monthly, which I had initially opposed living in. However, James had been adamant about this house, throwing a fit in an unbelievable manner, and I eventually gave in, with him pushing the responsibility of paying the rent entirely onto me. I found myself shouldering the burden of paying the monthly rent, which amounted to approximately $4,000, while James was expected to handle other living expenses. However, James had a habit of spending money without planning, often leaving me to cover the bills. This lack of financial responsibility extended to his mother, Dorothy, who frequently miscalculated her expenses and would call me over at the checkout when she realized she didn't have enough money. I was deeply disappointed with their inability to manage money. James would spend on his hobbies and desires before prioritizing living expenses, leaving me exhausted from his financial oversights. I had contributed my entire salary to the household for a long time, leaving me with very little for myself and making life extremely challenging. Recently, the burden intensified with increased expenses for Dorothy's food and allowance. The prospect of divorce meant shedding the hefty $4,000 monthly rent. Fortunately, the house was in James's name, sparing me from future responsibilities toward him and Dorothy. However, when I asked James to continue paying, he exclaimed, "Why should I pay? I don't live there anymore, and we're divorced. Dorothy even told me to leave the house, so I have no obligation to pay rent." In desperation, James pleaded for my help, but Dorothy intervened, confidently declaring, "Even without you, we can manage the rent. The amount you paid is nothing for James." I was flabbergasted, knowing that James, with a net income of around $2,000 and hardly any savings, could not afford the rent. Dorothy seemed under the impression that James was still financially well off, leading her to mistakenly believe in his abundance. Realizing the impracticality of their situation, I urged them to consider canceling the lease and discussing it with the real estate agent. Dorothy snapped back, dismissing my concerns. Frustrated, I hung up the phone, contemplating how James and Dorothy could provide a stable environment for raising a child. Ethan and I had recently moved into an apartment in a convenient neighborhood close to my workplace, creating a comfortable living environment. About a month after my divorce, James and Dorothy unexpectedly showed up at my workplace, causing a scene at the company's entrance and demanding to see the boss, which was me. I, who was out for lunch with Ethan at a family restaurant, was taken aback when I returned with him, only to find Dorothy and James causing a commotion at the reception. The child care center inside the company allowed me to have Ethan close even at work. The sudden appearance of James and Dorothy left me bewildered, especially since I had been waiting for a response to a meeting arranged by their lawyers. Dorothy, with tears that seemed more manipulative than genuine, pleaded with me, "Susan, can't you just come back home? I understand you are the one providing financially, but enough with this soul killing. It's time to put an end to this." It was clear that Dorothy believed her tearful act would work on anyone besides her son. She was intent on painting me as the villain in this situation. In response to Dorothy's pleas, James chimed in, "Hiring a lawyer? What were you thinking? This is a matter between us as a couple. Ethan would surely be happier with both his parents together." Despite his words, a father who prioritizes his mother over his own son only adds to the child's sorrow. Sighing deeply, weighed down by inner turmoil, I turned to James and said firmly yet calmly, "We're divorced. We're strangers now. If you have something to say, please do it through a lawyer." Upon hearing this, James seemed to realize that talking to me was futile. He turned to our son Ethan, who was standing beside his grandmother, and began speaking. "Hey Ethan, you'd prefer to stay with your dad and grandma, right?" James said, attempting to sway Ethan. "Absolutely, it must be lonely just with your mom always busy with work," added the grandmother, chiming in with her own persuasive tone. Ethan, seemingly frightened by this exchange, hid behind me and burst out crying loudly. "I don't like you both, you're mean." His pure tears were far more impactful than the grandmother's feigned weeping, resonating strongly with everyone around. Employees from nearby offices quickly gathered, responding to the commotion. They ushered James and the grandmother out of the company, restoring a semblance of order. Relieved at being freed from this distressing situation, I let out a sigh of relief. Later, through my lawyer, I warned them that if they ever showed up unannounced at my office or followed me and Ethan, I would consult the police. This warning seemed to calm them down. James and his mother, who were previously living in a house costing $4,000 in rent, had to let go of their luxurious lifestyle and move into a modest apartment. But the real tragedy for James was just beginning. He had been boasting to his colleagues about living in a lavish house, and now, terrified of them discovering his downgrade to a humble apartment, he quit his job without consulting his mother. This abrupt decision infuriated his mother. Eventually, they both had to start working out of necessity. Despite their new jobs, they spent their days blaming each other for losing Ethan, engaging in bitter arguments, and struggling to pay child support while trying to make ends meet. It was a challenging situation for them. As for me, I've been doing well in my job, and despite the absence of a father, Ethan has grown into a sturdy and reliable young man. In my heart, I always believed that even without such an unreliable father figure, I was capable of raising this child admirably. When I told my mother-in-law I was going back to my hometown to have my baby, she replied, "Go ahead. I don't want to see you." I felt relieved because I had been waiting for her to say that. I thought to myself, finally, I won't have to deal with her anymore. My name is Emily, and I'm almost 28 years old. My mom passed away when I was very young, so my grandmother took care of me while my dad ran his clothing business. My dad was strict, and I always did what he said. I never dated anyone because of his rules, but I had accepted that as my fate. After college, I briefly worked for my dad, but he said it was too hard to work together, so I had to quit. He didn't want me to work elsewhere either, but seeing my friends get jobs and start families made me want to work too. One night, I asked my dad if I could get a job. He simply said no without explaining why. I tried to reason with him, saying I needed to gain experience in society, but he shut me down. He insisted I stay at home. Frustrated, I threatened to leave home and find work elsewhere. My dad didn't like that and told me to stop talking back. Feeling upset, I stormed out and cried in my room for a long time. Eventually, I called my college friend Lisa and asked if I could stay at her place for a while. Lisa, who lived in a luxurious condo her parents gave her, agreed, sensing something was wrong. I quietly packed my suitcase and left home, hoping not to disturb my dad. I wrote a note explaining that I was staying with a friend and left it on my desk. Then, I took a taxi to Lisa's apartment. When I arrived, she welcomed me with my favorite coffee. I thanked her and poured out everything about the argument with my dad and why I left home. Lisa sympathized, saying I deserved freedom. It hit me hard that I had always followed my dad's orders without question, but now I longed for my own independence. Lisa agreed, saying it was normal to want to meet new people and have fun. She asked if my dad knew I was there, and I told her I left a note, but he didn't know any of my friends. Lisa suggested we go to bed since it was late. and she had prepared a separate room for me to sleep in. The next day, Lisa went to work, and when I checked my phone, I saw several missed calls from my dad. Feeling bad for worrying him, I sent him an email to reassure him that I was okay. Later in the evening, after Lisa finished work, she invited me to join her for a drink. Excited but inexperienced with socializing over drinks, I agreed to go out. When I got to the meeting place, I found Lisa waiting with two men. She introduced them, pointing to her boyfriend first, then to the single man, Max. With a warm smile, Max introduced himself, and our relationship began. Max worked at a small company in the clothing industry. At first, I wondered if Max's company was similar to my father's, but I quickly pushed the thought aside. Max's family situation was different from mine. He only had his mother around, but he didn't elaborate, and I didn't pry. One day, Max expressed his desire to meet my father, but I wasn't ready to go back home yet, despite exchanging emails with my dad. Instead, I suggested meeting Max's mom. He eagerly agreed, even suggesting we could visit her that very day. Wanting to bring a gift, I stopped by a bakery for a cake, knowing Max's mom appreciated such gestures. As it turned out, my mother-in-law not only appreciated gifts, but also became irritable if not presented with one. When we arrived at Max's house, his mother greeted us at the door, having received a message from him. She immediately questioned me about my life, expressing skepticism about my employment status and implying I lived a privileged life. I explained about my deceased mother and my father's job, but she dismissed my responses. Max, sensing the tension, urged us inside, asking if I had brought anything. Feeling rushed, I handed over the cake, apologizing for its simplicity. My mother-in-law snatched it from me, making a sarcastic remark before accepting it. In just a few minutes, I grew to dislike her, feeling sorry for anyone who had to deal with her as a mother-in-law. As soon as we stepped into the living room, my mother-in-law bombarded me with questions to which I responded with vague answers. However, she persisted, firing questions at me as if I were a suspect in an interrogation room. Feeling overwhelmed by the relentless questioning, I whispered to Max that I should probably leave soon. This seemed to infuriate my mother-in-law, her face flushing with anger. She accused me of hating her and giving insincere responses. Max tried to calm her down, but she lashed out, questioning his choice in bringing such a supposedly rude woman home. Annoyed, I defended myself, asking for specific feedback if there was something I could improve. This only seemed to aggravate her more, as she accused me of being cheeky and disliking her. I wanted to agree, but I just couldn't. I'm exhausted and longing to go home, I explained. My mother-in-law's response caught me off guard. How audacious of you. I wonder what kind of upbringing your parents gave you. They must have been lacking. Her words stung, and tears welled up in my eyes. Now you're crying for sympathy. If you want to leave so badly, go ahead. It might do you good. Oh, and by the way, I'll give this cake you brought to my dog Charlie, but he's quite picky, so he might not eat such a cheap cake. She pointed at the cake I had brought. Max intervened, telling his mother to stop. You really don't know how to judge people, he scolded her. Max's remark seemed to deflate his mother's argumentative energy. All I want is the best for you, Max, she countered, her tone softer. Max stood his ground, asserting his adulthood and his ability to handle his own affairs. His words brought tears to his mother's eyes, and she left the room, visibly upset. Feeling hurt by the harsh words of Max's mother, I decided to leave. However, Max caught up with me and apologized sincerely. Emily, I'm sorry for my mom's behavior. She might be feeling threatened, thinking she's losing me. I'll talk to her about it, okay? Please don't let this incident discourage you from visiting again. His words reassured me, but I couldn't shake off the hurt caused by his mother's comments about my parents. Max, what your mother said about my parents really hurt me. I don't think I want to see her again. As the sadness washed over me, tears welled up, and I found solace in Max's comforting embrace. After a while, he suggested we go somewhere, and we ended up at the beach, sitting on a sandy bench, watching the waves for hours. 2 months later, I discovered I was pregnant. When I shared the news with Max, he proposed marriage. Let's make it official. We don't need a grand ceremony, but we can live together in my house. I don't earn much, so renting an apartment isn't feasible. I'll talk to my mom about being more considerate towards you, Emily. Despite my reservations about living with his mother, I agreed, realizing it was our only option. Okay, I'll do my best to get along with your mother. And so, I found myself living with my mother-in-law after getting married. I returned home to inform my father about the decision. His face lit up with joy when he spotted me. It's wonderful to see you looking so well. We've been in touch, but it feels like ages since our last meeting. My father greeted me warmly. I'm sorry, Dad. I have something important to discuss with you. I replied, sensing his anticipation shift to curiosity. I proceeded to share the news of meeting Max, my pregnancy, and our plan to marry. My father listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he offered a simple, "Well, congratulations. I can't wait to meet my grandchild," though his smile seemed strained. "Thank you, Dad. I'm sorry for causing you any pain," I apologized, tears streaming down my cheeks. To my surprise, my father's eyes glistened with tears too. Instead of anger, his tender response hurt me more deeply. Eventually, I moved into my mother-in-law's home. Lisa, who had been a pillar of support since I left home, expressed her excitement about meeting my baby and shared her own hopes for marriage. Despite the mixed emotions, we made plans to dine together. Originally scheduled for Sunday, my mother-in-law insisted on moving the date to Saturday, citing superstitions. The move went smoothly, with the movers diligently transferring my belongings while my mother-in-law observed silently. Despite repeated warnings from the movers about the danger, my mother-in-law refused to step back. Once the move was completed, she called me over and questioned if I had given the movers their due payment. Confused, I asked, "Huh?" Sensing my confusion, she assumed I was feigning ignorance and left to rectify what she thought was a mistake. When she returned, she handed an exorbitant sum to the movers' leaders, assuming I hadn't provided enough. Stunned by the amount, I questioned her decision. "You gave them that much?" I exclaimed. She brushed it off, claiming it was for the best and citing superstition about avoiding curses by being generous. Knowing it would only lead to another argument, I remained silent, unwilling to engage further. My mother-in-law wore a smug expression, convinced of her righteousness. Just then, Max arrived and noticed the tension. He intervened, asking his mother what had happened. With a dismissive reply, she walked away. Max reassured me, expressing his disapproval of his mother's behavior. Grateful for his support, I decided not to mention the incident to avoid further conflict with my mother-in-law, knowing it would only worsen our relationship. After settling in, my mother-in-law noticeably avoided speaking to me, leaving me in peaceful silence for weeks at a time. One day, Max brought home some work documents in an envelope marked with the name Star Textiles Incorporated, causing me to gasp. This was a familiar name from my time working at my father's company. They were one of our subcontractors. Curious, I asked Max about the envelope's origin. "Is this from your company?" I inquired innocently. "Yes. Why do you ask?" he responded. Sensing it was best not to mention the connection between his company and my father's, I simply replied, "I was just curious. I realized I don't know much about your company." Max explained, "We're just a small subcontractor. If our parent company were to drop us, we'd go bankrupt instantly, and all the employees would lose their jobs." Max chuckled softly, a hint of nostalgia in his expression. Around a month later, I noticed a change in Max's routine. He started returning home from work later than usual and seemed visibly upset. Concerned, I asked him what was wrong. "You've been coming home late lately. Is everything okay?" "You seem different," I inquired. Max confessed, "The company is facing some challenges." "What kind of challenges?" I probed further. Max sighed. "The parent company unexpectedly slashed our orders by half. Our boss is desperately trying to convince them to maintain our business relationship. And we're also searching for new clients. But if things don't improve, We might go bankrupt. As I listened to Max's worries, I considered asking my dad for help. However, I knew my father's strict principles wouldn't allow him to assist a business partner based on personal feelings alone. It seemed like many of the company's partners were facing similar hardships. I disclosed to Max that my father's company was the parent company of his. Initially surprised, Max pleaded with me earnestly, his eyes gleaming with hope. "Emily, please implore your father not to cut ties with us," he urged. Regretfully, I explained, "Max, my father is firm when it comes to business. Personal matters wouldn't influence his decisions." Desperate, Max persisted. "Could you at least try?" Reluctantly, I agreed, knowing it likely wouldn't sway my father. Yet Max knelt before me, tears in his eyes, begging for help. "Please, I beg you," he pleaded. Frustrated, I implored him to stop, but I promised to speak to my father nonetheless. As Max lifted his head, tears of relief streamed down his face. That night, I called my father and relayed Max's plea. Surprisingly, my father agreed to help. "So, Max works for Star Textiles, Incorporated? Then I must assist them," he stated. I was taken aback, expecting him to decline outright due to his strict business principles. However, he outlined two conditions. First, he would continue business with Star Textiles but wanted Max to join his company. Second, he requested that both Max and I move in with him. Puzzled, I questioned his motives for wanting us to live with him. Uncomfortably, my father admitted, "I just want my daughter close by." I accepted his conditions but sought clarification on why he had decided to reduce dealings with Star Textiles initially. He explained that a new company had offered an enticing proposal, prompting the shift in partnerships. Upon conducting some research, we discovered that the new company my father intended to partner with had a history of unfulfilled promises, prompting us to reconsider the deal. So, Star Textiles would have been fine even if I hadn't intervened? I asked, amused by the irony. "Maybe," my father chuckled, and I couldn't help but laugh along. After hanging up, I promptly informed Max of my father's conditions. He sighed with relief at the news that Star Textiles was no longer at risk, but expressed hesitance about joining my father's company. "It's difficult for me to leave Star Textiles, Emily. I've built strong bonds there, and am unsure about starting anew," he admitted. Respecting his decision, I relayed his sentiments to my father, who acknowledged Max's dedication and allowed him to remain at Star Textiles. However, he remained firm about us moving in with him. Delighted by my father's decision, I cautioned Max not to disclose my father's involvement to his mother, knowing she would disapprove. He agreed, understanding the importance of keeping it a secret. Weeks later, as the time for our child's birth approached, I made the decision to return home. Despite having only my father and grandmother there, it felt preferable to staying with my mother-in-law. Waiting for the opportune moment when my mother-in-law was occupied with her afternoon tea, I approached her to break the news. "Mother-in-law, regarding my childbirth, I've chosen to go back home. It's just my dad and my active grandmother there," I explained calmly. Her response was as expected, filled with disdain and resentment. "By all means, go back. I don't want to see your face," she spat out. Unfazed by her reaction, I assured her, "You won't have to see me anymore. Max will soon be moving in with my parents as well." Her confusion was palpable as she questioned my decision. "Max is too busy with work to move," I reassured my mother-in-law, trying to ease any tension. Just then, Max entered and excitedly informed his mother, "Mom, everything is going to be fine with the company now." Emily helped me out. Confused, she asked, "What are you talking about?" Max explained, "Emily's dad is the owner of the parent company of the company I work for." Shocked, my mother-in-law's demeanor changed as she turned her attention to me. "Emily, I had no idea you were connected to Max's company in that way. I've been terribly rude to you," she admitted, bowing deeply. "It's all right now," I replied, trying to diffuse the tension. However, she surprised us all by requesting to live with my parents as well. Both Max and I declined, preferring not to dwell on the past hurtful interactions. I don't want to live with you, mother-in-law. Being here would only remind me of everything that's happened. I explained gently. Her tears flowing, she pleaded desperately, but we stood firm in our decision. Months later, we decided to visit my mother-in-law's house, only to find it empty and eerily quiet. Concerned, Max called out for his mother, receiving no response. As we searched the house, we found her emaciated and frail, lost in her own world. Despite our attempts to engage her, she remained silent, focusing only on the cake we had brought. As she devoured it hungrily, I couldn't help but think, well, mother-in-law, you brought this on yourself.